The election process in the United States is really a two-part procedure. We have primary elections and we have general elections. Now, we're going to start off by looking at primary elections, and these are elections in which political parties choose their candidate for the general election. In other words, you have Democrats running against Democrats and Republicans running against other Republicans to decide who's going to emerge and be the final candidate from each party to run against one another in November. And that election in November will actually determine who will hold the office. And so primary elections are sort of like an intramural game. Okay, and we see this in presidential elections, and I'll give an example here in a minute that'll make it a little bit clearer. But the idea is to find the best candidate from that party, and that's who's going to carry the party's standard in the general election. Primary elections are held in the spring, and there's not one national primary day, unlike our election in November. States have the choice of putting it wherever they want on the calendar. And in Pennsylvania, for example, it can move. Some years it's in late May, and in a presidential election year, it might be moved up into April. There's no one set day, but primaries are held in general in the spring. And so, to win a primary election, it's simply by winning the popular vote. And so, the popular vote simply means what candidate receives the most votes. They are the winner. Okay, so if you have 5 Democrats and one Democrat receives more votes than the other 4 candidates, then that will be the Democratic nominee for whatever office that is. Same thing would apply over in the Republican end. And so that's the point of primary elections. Now, in Pennsylvania and in many states, we have what is known as a closed primary. And what this means is that you have to be registered to a particular party in order to vote. Okay, for example, the Democrats and Republicans are the only candidates who hold primaries in Pennsylvania for the most part. Other parties choose their candidate through conventions and meetings, but the Democrats and Republicans choose their candidate through the primary. And so not only must you be registered to one of those 2 parties in order to vote in a primary, but you may only vote for members of your own party. In other words, the party to which you're registered. So Democrats can vote only for Democratic candidates. Republicans can vote only for Republican candidates. So if you walk into a polling place on primary election day, you'll be asked what party, to what party do you belong, and you'll be directed to one voting machine or the other, depending on your answer. Now, just before I even move on to showing an example from the 2008 presidential election, I want to make it clear that primaries aren't limited to a presidential election. No matter how small or how large the office, there is a primary held in which each party picks their candidate, whether it's for the mayor of a small town, whether it's for the governor of a state, whether it's for the president of the United States, or a member of Congress, or a member of a state legislature. It doesn't matter. There is a primary. Now, we do use the presidential primary, however, as an example. And I use 2008 just because that's the last election in which neither party had an incumbent president running for re-election. For example, in 2012, Barack Obama was an incumbent president running for the Democrats without opposition, because in most situations, no one from the president's party will challenge him for the nomination. But in 2008, it was the end of George Bush's second term, and so he couldn't run for the presidency again. So it was wide open. There could be any Republican, any Democrat, and from a larger selection of candidates, we eventually narrowed it down to 2 candidates per party. And the Republicans that ended up being the last 2 standing were John McCain and Mitt Romney. And so that's who was running against each other, competing for that Republican nomination in 2008. The Democrats narrowed it down to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And so these were the 2 candidates that Democrats decided between. All right, and so that's how primaries work. You have members of their own party running against one another to see who the nominee will end up being. Okay, now general elections, on the other hand, are where parties run their candidate against those from other parties to see who will actually win the office. So this is the election in which we actually choose the winner. And so now you have a Republican versus Democrat election, and also any third-party candidates that could exist. In presidential elections, we sometimes see this. For example, Ralph Nader ran representing the Green Party in the 2000 and 2004 elections. Ross Perot, Texas billionaire, ran as a third-party candidate in 1992 and 96. But in general, the elections come down to Republicans versus Democrats. And the general election is the one election where we do all vote nationwide on the same day. It's always the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. So in other words, if Tuesday, November 1st is the way the calendar strikes, we won't vote until November 8th. So the earliest it could be is November 2nd, the latest it could be is November 8th, but it's always the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. And with the exception of the presidential race, general elections are decided by the popular vote. So in other words, if Republican and Democrat are both running for the U.S. Senate, the vote getter, the highest vote getter, is going to win the office. If it's a local election, like for city council or school board or mayor, any of those, the highest vote. Now the presidential election is a different animal unto itself. We use the Electoral College, and I'm going to talk about that in a later video. But just to kind of continue to show you how this breaks down, we're going to stick with the 2008 election. And John McCain ended up winning the Republican nomination and ran against Barack Obama. And I'm sure you know that Barack Obama then won the general election and became the president. And so that's the difference between primary and general elections. And like I said, the popular vote is the determining factor in all but the presidential race. And we're going to spend time talking about the Electoral College in a later video.